question is comparing in order to seek some understanding of the differences and the fact of like the long or the short form. In fact, I'm going to make this a little clearer. So, so the question is, we have a long form and a short form. Why do we have two? What are the differences, if there are differences? Um, and so the understanding that came down to me from my teacher is that um, the long form was not called the long form. It was just our Tai Chi practice, right? At some point, it wasn't even called Tai Chi. That wasn't the term. But as we begin to differentiate and um, expand and vary things, then things develop names, right? Um, so, a father named Bob, who's Bob his whole life, the moment he has a son named Bob, he becomes Bob Sr. Like, we need now to differentiate because we have a couple different names. And so it becomes called the long form only because the one that followed it is shorter. And for whatever reason, the description was this is short. There are other differences, but that's the one that got picked up on, so it gets called short. And therefore, the other one is now the long. But people would call it the old form, or the first form, or the original form. So I don't know if there's a generally agreed upon or even right answer, but I think most common people refer to as long form, or you know, referred to by its number of moves. So you'll hear it. Then the length is inherent in the numerals, right? So the way that it was passed on to me is that we're developing this art to fight. Who are we going to get to do the fighting? It's the same people we choose these days, which is by and large 14 to 25-year-old males who are in otherwise good working order. So if they have one missing eye or a bum knee or multiple sclerosis, they're probably excused. But generally, what do they call it? Like, fit and ready or something like that. Um, that's who is going to go to war or defend the city if it's not war, right? Um, so these people learn this art, among other things. They learn how to, ride a horse, hurl a spear, or whatever, but they learn this art. And what they notice over time is that in combat, these people are healthier. Like the art works. More of them come back afterwards than the other side has people come back, right? So let's keep doing that. And that, of course, means refining it and so forth. But the other thing they notice is that in the periods between conflict, the people that had been doing this art are healthier than the rest of the population. I don't know if they're controlling for a whole bunch of other factors or how that works, but it's not done in a scientific way. It's done in well, yeah, I mean, we can all see that people that drink from that well don't do very well. People that get their water from the river seem to be sick less. It's not exactly science, but you kind of proto science, you kind of figure it out. So then the sort of natural response to that is that, hey, this healthy thing that these folks are doing, why don't we get more of our folks to do that? I mean, it's pretty healthy. Their joints are better, their sleep is better, their digestion's better, that sort of a thing. Plus, they can fight, I suppose, right? There's that too. So they get everybody together. We're going to start doing this thing. That doesn't go very well. Now, I'm telling the story as if it all happened in one village on one day. But They get everybody together. Great grandma, right? The guy, born with collapsed arches. The other guy with tennis elbow, years before they invented tennis, perhaps. You know, the other person who's blind, the other person that's obese, whatever. They get them all together and say, let's do this thing. Which thing is that? The thing that our soldiers have been doing, or 19-year-old men. Doesn't go very well. They have to hold postures. They have to have a deep stance. They have to jump up in the air. They have to, all the different things. So we have this disconnect between really, really healthy thing, want to get it to a population that can't access it because it's not a pill that I can just hand to everybody. It's a action. How do we get them to access it? Well, we have to find a way to abridge it, simplify it, um, distill it, might be a nice term, remove the excess. But I don't mean just carve away willy-nilly. If we're distilling, what we're doing is we're moving towards essence as we simplify. We're clarifying. If I move in the direction of simplicity, but I move to the point at which the essence of the thing is no longer apprehendable or extant, I haven't simplified, I've destroyed or lost or taken away. So I don't know that I prefer to call it simplified, but that's sort of the common way to say it. I might prefer something like distill or essensify is the word I use when I'm writing. But as long as we know what we mean. Huh? Essence, if I. Now, that's a human process, so it's not necessarily done as perfectly as it could be, right? But we would like to think that over the years, with smart people devoting their lives to it, it's relatively correct. Not much was lost. Not much was mistakenly left in, right? Over time and iterative, probably arrive at something like what you would imagine in the abstract. I feel like my teacher right now, sitting back, talking. Although he wouldn't sit back, he'd always sit the same way. Like he'd always sit like that. Um, so what we have in the short form is a form that proposes to carry all of the essence of Tai Chi Chuan in a accessible manner. So we could say a manner that's accessible to, let's just say, most of the population, or much more than the little sliver of people who would be sent off to war, right? It probably aims to be able to include absolutely everybody, but in fairness, it's probably, well, there's some people, somebody in an iron lung, and maybe you can't quite do this. As a teacher, I would still like, well, how can I teach you something of the art? And so the short form or distilled form is a more accessible way to reach the principles, all of the principles of the other art. And so the overall choreography, there's less of it, but also the moves themselves are um, distilled. So there's much less complexity in many of the moves themselves. Not just that we took out a bunch of moves that more or less repeated themselves or taught the same lesson, offered the same benefit as these other moves, but also the given move. Ah, we don't need to do all of that. And what the only specific thing that is, let's say, consciously lost in the short form is the practice of Fajin, right? And some will say the practice of Dimak was also lost in that. And maybe somebody have some other cases. And so I'm just honest about that when I'm teaching. Like this form is not proposing to teach that, but it's also not proposing to hide it. In fact, my form suggests it, and then I overtly teach, hey, there's this other thing. We're not doing it because we're doing this form, but it is part of Tai Chi Chuan. That's something. Um, so that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Dim mak. So what we refer to as pressure point striking or manipulation. Yeah.